Hi, you guys. Welcome back. This is Richard Sachs, your host on Lost Arts Radio, and we've got an exciting show tonight. It's one I've been waiting for about 5 years, and hopefully we won't wait that long for the next installment. Basically, we have this little problem going on in the U.S. and in most of the world at the moment. It's a coordinated global assault against humanity all over, and I think against all life on the planet, actually, which is worth your attention. And so really, we need to come up with something pretty quick about how we're going to turn it around. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we know where it's going. And so one of the people I've been wanting to get input on that for quite a while is our friend KrisAnne Hall. I haven't had a chance to meet her before now, but I'm one of the fans. And she's been doing work that's exemplary to attorneys everywhere. And I've been thinking for a long time, and human beings, not just human attorneys, but I've been thinking for a long time, attorneys are supposed to, just like, well, we're going to talk about this because any one of these little things could be a whole several-hour discussion. But attorneys could make a great contribution to the whole future of the world, basically, starting anywhere, like in the U.S., for example. So we have a lot to talk about. It's going to be exciting. So welcome, KrisAnne, and I'm really appreciative of all that you're doing. And I thought in the brief time that we've got, let's just do three things. At the end, I want to talk about all you're doing and how people can support you and do what you would like to see them do, the ones who are up to it. And before that, I thought, all right, let's narrow it down to two things. We can talk about what the problem is right now in America, which is connected to the problem in the rest of the world, and what's the solution. And if we just do those two details, then that should be a good start, right? And I'm being somewhat facetious because those are huge issues, and that includes
a few days.
Yeah, several days. I hope you got a sleeping bag and everything, so we'll be ready to go.
I should have grabbed a cup of coffee.
You're right. Well, remember this is recorded, so if you need a cup of coffee, we can stop and wait for you.
Okay.
So if we come down to the most foundational level, that the people who started the country now called the United States of America, which used to be united with a small u, that was because they were running away from tyranny. And they were trying to set up a system that would prevent that from happening in the future and basically protect them from inner or outer threats against their freedom. So some things happened since then, and it's evolved to a point where we've got a global coordinated attack against humanity, I think, and you can disagree with me, but I see this as a worldwide assault on life.
Right. Absolutely.
And any country like America could stand up against it and start a real pandemic of freedom and consciousness. And I think your work is encouraging that to happen.
Well, that's an encouragement to me. I mean, we are on a mission to teach people about securing their natural rights. That's the foundation upon which America was built, was natural rights. That's why the Declaration of Independence reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights." These are rights that come by the nature of our creation. They don't come from documents. They don't come from government. They don't come from a collective. And so anything contrary to that is contrary to American standard. And that's why we have to get back to teaching the standard so that we can secure it for future generations as well.
Most people never heard of a natural right. So if they had to understand, we want to include everybody, not just the people who are already aware of everything you're saying, but the people who just stumble in and say, oh, that's interesting. What's a natural right? So what would you tell them?
Well, I think that the authority of establishing America's foundation as a natural right is best explained by those who actually positioned themselves to do that. Samuel Adams explained it this way. He said, among the natural rights of the people are first life, second liberty, third property, together number 4, with the right to protect and defend them in the best manner they can. Right. These are what we call natural rights because they are derived from the first law of nature, which is a duty of self-preservation. So if you think about the most basal instinct of every living creature, and that's to survive, our duty by the nature of living is to continue living. And life, your right to your life is necessary to continue living. Your right to liberty is necessary to continue living, because without liberty, you're a slave.
Right.
And slave means you don't possess the right to live. Someone else possesses the power to determine whether you can live or not. Property is not that collective Marxist ideology of property that you have the right to own someone else's property, or someone else has the right to own all property.
Right.
Property as a right is the right to do with whatever you see fit with whatever is yours. So property being a natural right is the property that's necessary to support your life. If you don't have a right to access property, to own property, then how do you escape the elements to continue your life? How do you grow food to continue your life? And then the fourth being the right to defend life, liberty, and property, once again, is an individual right. You see, you have an individual right to defend your life, your liberty, your property. Because if you don't have an individual, unalienable right to defend yourself, then you are enslaved to whomever you're relying on to provide that service for you.
Right. So those are the basic rights, the foundational rights that everybody needs. And I think one of the first questions that would come up, especially from the people who have been trained to think that government knows how far your rights should go, and that for your own safety, they put the limits on it, right? Because you're only a person, you don't even have, all these degrees of the experts and their wisdom and everything. So what are the real constraints that are legitimate on individual freedom?
Well, it's really, to answer that question, you have to really understand that America is not built on freedom. America is built on liberty. And there is a difference between liberty and freedom.
Okay.
When you read what our founders wrote, for example, John Adams wrote in 1765, liberty must at all hazards be supported. Samuel Adams talked about liberty. I mean, they all talk about, Patrick Henry said, give me liberty or give me death.
Right.
And so when I teach these fundamental foundational principles, even to young people, right, because we've been teaching all over the country. You said we've been trying to hook this show up for 5 years. I've actually been teaching across the country for 11 years.
Wow. Okay.
For 7 of those years, we averaged, before all the shutdowns, we averaged 260 meetings in over 22 states every year. So we teach young people, we teach college students, we teach professional groups, we teach civics groups, I teach legislators in session, I teach sheriffs and deputies. I mean, we're teaching all these people. When I teach them about liberty, it's a simple, I like to present it in the manner of a simple mathematical equation, because liberty and freedom are not the same thing. You see, freedom is the freedom to do whatever you want, regardless of how that harms or controls other people.
Right.
Freedom is
so theft would be included in freedom.
Theft would be right, exactly. So in a society built on freedom, I'm free to lie, I'm free to steal, I'm even free to murder.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But liberty is not freedom. America's not built on freedom, America's built on liberty. And this is the simple mathematical equation. Liberty equals freedom plus morality. Liberty is, yes, I recognized I am created free. I am created with the freedom to choose whatever I want to do. But liberty says there are some things I will not do because they're wrong. And liberty, what people miss, is that liberty requires an element of self-governance. The ability to say, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And that's America was built with that element of self-governance so that we could have limited government. The less ability to self-govern, the more government is necessary to control the lives of people so they don't harm others. The more ability to self-govern, the less government that you need. Okay. Our founders, even Jefferson said that he envisioned a day where we would become so enlightened in liberty that we would amend the Constitution to create less government than what they started with.
Yeah, I can see that. Ultimately, the really well-intentioned, wise people who talk about anarchy, and they don't mean riots and everything.
Right.
They mean enlightened self-government with automatic morality constraining each person by themselves.
Right.
They sometimes miss the point that we're not quite there yet. And,
right.
In this trend, it's not only government that is the criminal, it's a lot of individuals too that are more in favor of freedom than liberty. Right. And they think if they can get away with it, they should be able to do it.
Right.
So you're saying that, you know, when you brought up that liberty includes the element of morality in the equation, somebody's got to define the morality, right? And I would imagine that there would be various people who say they've got the right idea of what that should be. You know, for example, corporations are used as vehicles to do a lot of things that are deadly to lots of people and infringe on their own individual liberties and freedoms and rights and everything. But who decides that those corporations or the individuals behind them can't do that? What kind of a system takes care of that?
Well, you know, here's how this works, right? Man creates society.
Yeah.
Society creates government. So when you come together as society, you create government. It's Madison said, if men were angels, we wouldn't need government.
Exactly.
And if men were governed by angels, we wouldn't need checks and balances. So we recognize that there is a fallen nature, a depraved nature inherently in man. And so when our founders defined that morality, it's just simply, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but in reality, it is just that simple. It is that your activity knows no boundaries, except that you cannot harm or control the right of another. And so the way I explain it is, if I live in an area where I have 2,000 miles all around me, my liberty bubble is huge. I can do just about anything that I want within my liberty bubble, right? But my liberty only extends until I bump into someone else's liberty. So when you live closer to people, you have a smaller liberty bubble. When you have greater area to live, you have a larger liberty bubble. And so what it is, it's under that principle. The Bible calls it the love your neighbor as yourself. The secular community calls it the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right?
That pretty much takes care of it, yeah.
Yeah, and that's it. You have to limit yourself. Morality is, I can do whatever I want with whatever is my own as long as I don't interfere with the rights or the liberties of someone else.
Okay, what if you get into the modern technological issues that add to this? For example, I'm going to invent a chemical that I can put in the soil that kills all plant life for the next million years. And I'm doing it on property that I own and control. Is that part of legitimate liberty?
No, it's not, because liberty requires stewardship. Okay. Liberty understands, yes, I own property, but in reality, I'm not an eternal owner of that property. I'm a stewardship owner of that property. Liberty requires that I not only use that property, but I prepare it in a prospering way for future generations. You could actually take it even if you don't want to, in a simpler aspect, right? What if you put those chemicals on your property and they leach into the waterway? Is that your responsibility? It absolutely is. And the way I teach, because I'm a professor at the River School of Government in Tampa, and we teach these classes, the fundamentals of liberty, the foundation, the origin of liberty, what is the limit of your liberty? And I say, okay, fine. What you have, if you were to take from a very temporal perspective, not from an eternal perspective, because I'll tell you that you have an obligation to your eternity, to your future generations. Let me explain it to you this way, if you want to talk about the stewardship for future generations. Samuel Adams said this: when we tamely suffer a lawless attack upon our liberty, we encourage it and we involve others in our doom. He said it's a serious consideration that should weigh heavy on our hearts, that ages and millions yet unborn will be the miserable sharers of our experience. So liberty, a liberty mentality, is a future-looking mentality as well. So you don't bump into the liberty of the future, but take it from a temporal, right, an immediate situation.
Okay.
I have land that comes again, that is border of my property line is a stream.
Okay.
I have the right to do whatever I want with whatever is my own, with the limit of liberty that I cannot harm or control the right of another. That liberty, self-governance, requires that I don't dump my trash into the river, because now that river is flowing down to my neighbor who owns that part of the river. I am now harming his liberty, his property ownership. And so if you just take it from that fluid flow kind of perspective, my liberty stops the minute I hurt somebody else's. And that requires stewardship. Conservation is a liberty concept.
Because it's a legitimate constraint on freedom that should be self-imposed, right?
That's right. Should be self-imposed.
And if it's not, that's another issue.
Right. If it's not, then you have government, right? So the purpose of government is to promote good and to punish evil. See, that's kind of where we mess up today. We think laws are established to stop people from doing bad things.
Yeah.
But laws don't stop crimes.
Right.
Everybody who works in the criminal justice system knows that if laws stopped crimes, America would be a crime-free place, because we got way too many laws, right?
Yes.
The criminal justice system is not established to stop people from doing bad things. The criminal justice system is established to punish people who are not self-governing. So if I am now destroying somebody else, then we punish people for that activity.
With
That's
the
not
specific
regulating
idea that
them.
the idea is that the punishment is there because it's going to stop it from continuing, right?
Well, the punishment is there to compensate for the lack of self-governance, that somebody will weigh out the cost-benefit analysis, right? That, you know, maybe I don't have the moral constraint, but I'd rather not do that because I don't want the punishment. It won't stop the crime, because there are people who don't care about punishment. You know, they're
Right. But it's supposed to be a deterrent for most
yes, it's supposed to be a deterrent.
and other people who are observing it.
Right. But the government, what I'm trying to say, and I don't know if I'm doing it well, government is there to punish, not to issue positive constraints. To tell people you have to get a permit to do this, or you have to pay a fee to do this. No, that's not the purpose of government. Purpose of government is to say, if you do this to the harm of others, we're going to punish you for harming. We're not going to make you seek permission to do with whatever is yours.
Right.
That's not the role of government.
There's also an element of restitution, right? That
Yes, absolutely.
It's not just a punishment, but you're supposed to try to help fix what you broke.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
But when government begins to be proactive and starts making people pay and get permits and pay fees to do things on their land, which would otherwise be okay.
Right.
Now you have an improper role of government, in reality, you have government taking your land. Because if you don't have the right to do what with yours, whatever is yours, to the constraint of self-governance,
Right.
to, on your own,
Right.
then you don't own your property.
Well, so you're talking about government, certainly at this point, not just federal.
Right.
Because local governments do the same thing, right?
Absolutely, federal and local. If government is making property constraints within the realm of do on your property with what is yours, then what you're actually saying is you don't own your property, government does. If you have to seek permission from government to do something on your land, you don't own that land, because ownership is dominion. Ownership is dominion and control to the exclusion of everybody else.
Right.
So if you don't have exclusive rights to do on your property within the realm of self-governance, respecting the liberty and the property of others, you make those choices, you are an indentured servant to whomever you're asking permission to use your land.
So with that concept, a lot of things to bring it into line with that would have to change.
Absolutely.
I mean, for example, the little issue of property tax.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there can't be any property tax with what you just said.
That's absolutely right.
That would have to totally go away.
Right. Property taxes are not in the concept of liberty. What is in the concept of liberty would be a consumption tax. So obviously, if you live together in a community, you come together, you pay taxes to create and maintain your roads, to maintain your trash, to provide water, and that sort of thing.
Right.
Well, if you're going to do that as a society, it has to be done voluntarily, which is done through consumption taxes, which means then that you choose to buy things.
That's like what you call a sales tax, right?
Yeah. When you choose to buy them, you pay the sales tax, which goes into the community to provide for these things.
Right.
You also have to understand that, basic economic intelligence, there is no such thing as free stuff. So whatever you expect from society at no cost the money has to come from somewhere. So if you want to have firefighters, and you want to have something beyond a volunteer fire department,
right,
then the people in society will either have to admit and voluntarily submit to a form of taxation, or they will have to agree that if they call on the firefighters to come help them, they're going to have to pay them.
And then there's the issue that some people can't afford it.
Well, and then if that's the case, then the society, the local government, has to voluntarily come into an agreement, or better yet, charity remain a private thing.
Right, right.
So that the church, who is commanded by their God to be in charity, if you are a Christian, the Bible never commands government to engage in charity. If you're a Christian, the Bible commands you to engage in charity. As a matter of fact, to cheerfully engage in charity.
That's
so
the tithing aspect, right?
Tithing and offerings.
Yeah,
so they're two different things. Tithing is standard. Offering is above that. So you have the tithe and offering standard there to provide for those who cannot provide for themselves. But then you also have this distinction now. You're not just providing people who don't want to provide for themselves, or who are choosing and making bad choices to not provide for themselves. You teach people to fish. You don't continually provide them with fish.
Right.
And so you have a mechanism in society where the private people come together and they say, okay, well, we'll help people pay for their fire service. We'll help people pay for their police service. But the money has to come from somewhere, because you can't demand that firefighters work at no cost.
Right.
Or you can't demand that police that work or doctors work at no cost, because then that's slavery.
Well, and they'll all just disappear. All right. And then the issue of technology comes up a lot. I'm looking at the things we would have to change to get back in line with what you're talking about. An example is elimination of all property tax and a lot of other things. But also there's the issue now of technology, because we talked about if I want to invent a chemical to poison the soil that I live on, even if it's within the borders of my property and I don't have a stream, it's like a human body. It's all connected. So I'm actually poisoning other land too, indirectly. So that's not a legitimate part of liberty. But if
you would punish people for that. You would create a crime. There within the criminal justice system, there would be a crime with a proper punishment for that kind of what am I trying to say here? The kind of contamination of that land. And then you also have the mechanism of restitution. Yeah. So there would be a criminal charge, there'd be civil restitution, there'd be civil damages. I mean, there's so many realms in which that takes place. You can't really stop someone from inventing something. Right. That is not the proper role of government. But if somebody uses something to harm or control the right of another, then the proper role of government comes in and you punish them for that and you create a way of restitution.
All these elements fit together like education, because right now people are being educated to think that anti-life technologies are normal and good. For example, if I invent a technology that is supposed to enhance wireless communication, and to help that, I put up satellites all over the world to radiate every part of the surface. You know, they call it 5G, but it can go beyond that too. That would be similar to what you're just talking about, right? Except I'm doing it for the whole world.
Right. And the remedy in that is that the people who are damaged would have a criminal and civil remedy against those who are creating the harm. Okay. The problem that we have, again, is in the fact that we are operating outside the realm of due process. We are operating outside the control of limited government. And what complicates these situations is, you know, for example, the pharmaceutical companies who the government, our legislators, actually create legislation to shield them from from accountability, from criminal actions. The interesting thing is, I don't want to get too legalese, too wonky on you, but
it's good.
The regulations that create, like the Environmental Protection Agency, OSHA, all of these regulatory agencies exist not to prevent people from, or even to create punishments for people who do wrong. You see, because every violation that is a fine within a regulatory agency, that activity is already covered in criminal law. We don't need administrative law branches. We don't need regulatory agencies. What we need to do is enforce the crimes that are on the books. Right. The problem is that we have a society where politicians try to shield those who own the big corporations by creating, not prosecuting them. So you have corruption at the local government level who won't prosecute the corporate CEO because of all the money that comes in, but the people are still wronged, and they go to their legislators and they say, this boss man is operating our business in such a negligent way that people are slipping and falling in the meat grinders, and they're not being charged with the crimes. Come to our rescue. And so legislators do what legislators do. They create laws, they create regulations. Right. So if we actually prosecuted business owners for negligent manslaughter, for murder, for great bodily harm, which are actual crimes, if we prosecuted them, there would be no need for any regulatory community at all.
And at the federal level, it's actually illegal because of the specific nature of the Constitution,
Absolutely.
for almost any of those agencies to even exist.
Yeah. Well, the majority of those agencies, 95%, and you look, there are hundreds of them.
Yeah.
People don't have any idea how many executive agencies there are.
They've only
So I'm
heard of
trying
a
to
few.
be conservative and saying 95% are completely and totally unconstitutional within the state.
Right.
Now, you can have a U.S. FDA, you can have a U.S. EPA, but their only jurisdiction is Washington, D.C., federal land, and territories, which, by the way, federal land is also way bigger than it's supposed to be. So you're talking about jurisdiction of the federal government, which is forts, ports, magazines, and the buildings necessary to operate those, when a state concedes that they can be paid for that land. So the federal government has to say, we'd like to have this for our fort, port, magazine, and build buildings on it. And the state has to say, okay, this is what you have to pay us to have it. There is no authorization for national parks and national reserves and national monuments.
And Bureau of Land Management, right?
No.
Because they own like 40% of the real estate in the country now.
Yeah, there's no authorization for the federal government to own land, period.
Yeah.
If they own land, it's a territory. And it's only temporary. We're not supposed to be an empire that owns other people.
Right.
All of the territories that America manages today, that's completely outside the concept of American constitutional republic. If we were to have a territory, it was temporary while that territory established a local state government and then petitioned to become a state. Once the local government is established and they petition to be a state, if they're accepted as a state, then the federal government has absolutely no more authority on that land, period.
Right, because the new state takes the position of the original 13 states.
Right,
in
exactly.
being superior to the federal government.
Exactly. They become an independent sovereign government.
Yeah.
If a territory establishes its own government, petitions, and is not accepted, then they become an independent sovereign country.
Right.
We're not supposed to have generations of territorial ownership. That's not who we are. As a matter of fact, that's who we said we were going to separate from.
Right. And all these things that are unconstitutional, that are just being left as they are and not being stopped. I guess the first question that comes up, if you were going to actually think of fixing any of that stuff, what are the penalties for violating the Constitution, and where are they?
Well, the penalties at the state level are established by state constitution. The penalties at the federal level are established by the federal constitution. There's impeachment. The impeachment is the main penalty, right?
But I mean, for the penalty for having an unconstitutional agency.
Right. Well, the penalty for having an unconstitutional agency has to come from the people. The penalty for an unconstitutional agency is noncompliance. That's the penalty. And then the people have to be active in their government to remove those from office who will establish unconstitutional. You see, the Constitution is not an active document. It's a piece of paper with ink on it. It establishes the boundaries, but it's inherent upon the people and the states on the to keep in the federal government in check.
Yeah.
So the penalty for an unconstitutional agency is the states refusing to submit to that authority, declaring no jurisdiction.
So as an example, take Bureau of Land Management, because that's a pretty big one, actually. That says that the federal government owns, I'm probably not exactly right, but something like 40% of the country, the real estate. And you want to fix that, ideally. And you're saying the way to fix it is state by state, saying that they don't recognize the authority. And that would have to be implemented probably by sheriffs, I would imagine.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, so you have this giant, supposedly federally owned land, and the sheriffs would have to prevent access to it by unauthorized personnel who claim they own it.
Right.
And then the state would what would the state do with it at that point?
Well, the state could maintain it. The state could allow the citizens to buy it. You would have to come up as a state with what to do with that land. Maybe you wanted to have it as a preserve. You know, the state says we want to have this as a preservation for a park or of our resources, then that's fine.
Yeah.
But then it has to be done at the state level, not at the federal level.
Right, and that would have to happen.
The state retains the authority to do that.
So that would have to happen in 50 different jurisdictions.
Absolutely.
And that would be up to the people with some kind of a referendum or something like that, right?
Right. It would have to come through the legitimacy of the laws through the state constitution, however the state constitution describes that. But these things are happening, just not like on a statewide level. You have Brad Rogers, who was the sheriff of Elkhart, Indiana, kicked the USDA and the FDA out of his county. You have Marty Gleave, who is in Piatt County, Utah, who told the Federal Forestry Service, "You're not going to tell us how to maintain our land. You and the BLM, you guys can go take a flying leap. You and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, you can take a leap." He says, "I'll deputize everybody in my county if I have to, but you're not going to do this anymore."
Right.
You have Sheriff Hamilton in I can't remember the county now, in New Mexico, who in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, deputized an entire church body to keep the governor from shutting the church down during COVID. So these things are happening. You have the sheriff of Chavez County, New Mexico, Mike Harrington, who told the governor, "There is no one in this state that's going to shut down any of my businesses, not the state police, not any of your regulatory agencies, no one. I am the authority in this county, and because I have this authority, I have a direct and important loyalty to the rights of the people in the Constitution of New Mexico. And in that, I'm not going to let you shut down our businesses." And so these things are happening across America, but you don't get to see them in the media because that kind of stuff, the media doesn't entertain, the people actually controlling government the way it's supposed to be controlled.
That in itself is a really interesting issue that touches on almost everything else about the media, because the media is kind of protected by the First Amendment, right?
Well, the media, not just the media, everyone is protected. Okay? Everyone, the Constitution of the United States, the First Amendment, establishes that we all have a natural right to freedom of speech and freedom of press. Right. Freedom of press is not called press because it's for journalists. Freedom of press is about the printing press, which is the right to disseminate your ideas, your conscience, in whatever medium is available to you. Right. So this is not something that's reserved to the press. But remember, it's a liberty, it's not a freedom.
Exactly.
So even the press should be held accountable when what they do is harming or controlling the right of another.
Right now, it's threatening the survival of the country.
Well, and they should be held accountable, right? Here's the thing. If I, as an individual, went around telling everybody to drink this magic liquid, and this magic liquid would cure every ailment that you have, and I'm promoting this and I'm promoting this, I'm never telling anybody that there's a risk. I'm never telling anybody that I know it will harm people, but I just tell them they have to do that, right?
Right.
From the criminal justice system, I am liable for that damage that happens to other people. But for my endorsement, these people would not be doing that. The but for means I'm liable for any harm that comes to them. The press would be liable. This is not a freedom of speech thing. It is a liability thing, but for their endorsement of a product, these people would not be harmed.
Right.
And so that's where due process comes in, right? So then you have to bring a civil suit or a criminal suit, you bring them to trial, you bring the evidence, and then the jury decides, did they do this knowingly and recklessly? yes, then they're liable for this harm. Did they not do it knowingly and recklessly? Did they do it because they were actually saying good for people? Then it's covered under freedom of speech.
Okay, so then you look at the situation that we're in now, which in many ways, especially with what they're calling the pandemic, and I'm taking the liberty to talk about this because if we don't, that's not going to lead to good results.
Right.
And right now, with respect to that and other things, they're doing so much harm, and they have been for a while in various ways, and they're not getting shut down for it, and it's not going to court or anything like that because there's this massive complex supporting it. So practically speaking, on the level that you're talking about, how does that get changed?
Well, what you're talking about is a system that's broken, right?
That's right.
We have this problem because we're not following the standard. We have this problem because we're not following the rules of government established in the Constitution.
And that includes the court system and all.
And the court system, right. And when we have an online educational program called LibertyFirstSociety.com.
Okay.
And when you're a member of Liberty First Society, the first courses that we are recommending that you take are the origin of liberty and the history of the Constitution. And you learn that there are certain things that people in power have always done. There are certain tendencies in government that have always happened. And the corruption of the court system has always been one of the first things that is corrupted. So when you say, and the court system, what we really should say, the court system and then everything else, right?
Yeah,
because that's
okay.
how that works, right? Just saying. And here, let me explain to you again, and this, I know I have a tendency to speak this way, but this wisdom of our founders is, because I don't want people to say, look at what KrisAnne Hall, because then you get that whole vetted, oh, who's she? What's her credentials, right?
Yeah.
So we're not going to do this cult of authority thing with KrisAnne, but we're going to lay the foundation as relevant to those who actually formed America. And Samuel Adams said this: "No people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved."
That explains a lot of what's happening right now.
He said, on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, that's their inability to self-govern,
Right.
he said they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders.
And if they have foreign invaders in addition, then it's even faster.
Well, we wouldn't have foreign invaders if we hadn't become universally ignorant.
Exactly. So that's
the answer to your question is not the answer that people want. And unfortunately, I can't change it. The answer to your question is how do you fix this? Has to begin with education.
I totally agree.
Which requires a personal responsibility.
That's obviously agreed to by the people that are taking over because they have a fake education system to make sure that doesn't happen.
Absolutely. The Marxist education system that we have established in America today that began in the mid-1800s, that's when the Marxists began taking over our education system in the mid-1800s, proves that education is the key. It proves it.
Yeah, exactly. So not only do we not have the needed education on a big scale, but we have an anti-education.
Right.
So the more school you go to, the less common sense and ability to think that you have.
Exactly. And that's by design. If you look, I have on my website, KrisAnneHall.com, I have an article, Stolen Education, Stolen Children, Stolen Future.
Right.
And in that article, I give the timeline of the Marxist takeover of our education system as researched and identified by Charlotte Iserbyt, who was the education advisor for the Reagan administration.
Right.
And so in this timeline, you see the actual stated purpose of the American education system is not to educate. It's a psychological laboratory, right? That's the purpose of our education system, was to be a psychological laboratory to study human behavior.
You have the sources for that on your website.
Absolutely. There are sources of that in that article.
Okay.
And to create, and this is a paraphrase of the quote. The quote itself is in the article, but I can't remember right now the exact wording.
Okay.
The purpose stated by those who were creating the Board of Education was to create a docile, obedient society that will yield to, I think what they said, to our molding hands.
So it's been
That's the
very
purpose of
successful.
the public education
It's
system.
been very successful.
Absolutely. And when people talk today about the American education system is failing, the minute you find someone that says, the American education system is failing, it has failed, you have found someone who doesn't understand what the American education system was built to do.
All these systems are working too well.
They're doing exactly what they were designed to do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Same thing
Problem
with-
is, we've become ignorant, and we'd rather find a political savior. We'd rather look to find somebody we can elect to fix all our problems with the magic wand of a pen
Yes.
or a vote than to take on the personal responsibility that's absolutely necessary in a liberty-founded society to self-govern and education and self-governing.
So if this is what I call sometimes the issue of consciousness test that we're in right now. Either we become conscious, in which case fixing things flows from that, or we stay ignorant zombies, and no matter who we elect and what we do, it just keeps going the way it's going.
And it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. But here's the thing. History has periods where we do that. The inevitability, what Jefferson would call a self-evident truth, is that eventually the people will get to the point where they can't tolerate it anymore.
Stretch a rubber band, right? And if it's strong when it always comes back.
And the people always come back because liberty is an inherent gift, right? And at some point in time, the oppression becomes so great that there is an awakening that happens in the person in society, and they start pushing back.
So the advantage of doing that sooner is that you don't have to go through the unpleasantness that happens if it goes further in the negative direction.
Well, the advantage of doing it sooner is the cost of correction is less. See, if we do it now, we can correct this with peaceful noncompliance. It won't cost a lot. But the longer we wait, the inevitability that we will have to stand when we have no choice and we have no chance of, we have less chance of victory. Right. That's when it costs life and blood and generations. Yeah. We have the opportunity now to engage in peaceful noncompliance where we can do it without the cost of human life in correction.
So
but if we wait too long, you will pay. You will fight when there is no hope because you would rather die than be a slave.
At least some percentage would do that.
Right, exactly.
Yes. So in the American Revolutionary time, since it got to the point where they had to do it by, physical fighting, why did it have to get to that at that time rather than peaceful noncompliance then?
Well, I think the first fatal flaw is that they had a monarchy.
They did.
Right?
Yeah.
So even though they had a limited monarchy, a government that had been built, they designed a limited monarchy in 1014. This is part of what we cover in the history of the Constitution class that I have at libertyfirstsociety.com.
Talking about the Magna Carta principles and stuff like that.
Well, no, this is before that. So beginning in 1014, before it was England, it was just the Anglo-Saxon people. Right. They decided that they were going to choose a king to govern them under limited government principles. His name was Ethelred, and they told Ethelred, we'll let you be our king, we'll choose you to be our king, but you have to understand there's a separation of power that's now going to exist. Your only job as king is going to be foreign affairs and helping us organize for our defense against attacking foreign affairs. Right. You will agree to leave the people alone to govern themselves locally in their shires. So the king's authority under the Ethelred Agreement was foreign, not domestic. And so they created this limited monarchy where the king was actually limited in his authority by the will of the people. And that's the beginning of our evolution to our constitutional republic. And
so that was being looked at by the American founders as one of the things they drew from, right?
Absolutely.
And what kind of a structure did they set up for domestic affairs in that situation?
Well, our founders took the Ethelred Agreement and created the very platform for our constitutional republic.
No, I mean in 10, whatever it was. What
Their
did
local
what did
government
they do?
were shires.
So that was like everything made up of counties, basically?
Everything was just counties, yeah.
Okay.
So they had the county government, they had the local government, they had, everybody governed locally. So each shire was an independent government. But
And
that's the same platform that we created in America. The federal government's job is foreign affairs, and the states were to be left alone to govern themselves.
They forgot about the foreign affairs thing.
Yeah.
And even the foreign affairs they're doing is like, what country do we invade and occupy?
Right,
steal from.
Yeah, the preamble says common defense, not offense. So
Yeah, they figured as long as they call it the Defense Department, which was originally the War Department, right?
yeah, right, the War Department.
Then everybody would think, oh, defense, that must be good.
Yeah. No, that's right.
So
what we have are generations, of English people who start now writing contracts with their government, compacts, constitutions with their government. The first written one is 1100.
Okay.
By the time we get to our independence, we have 5 written constitutional compacts with the English government, which establish the role of government to secure the rights of the people and the limited nature of government not to invade on the rights of the people. But the recurring problem always was we have a king. And so the only way you control a king is to chop off his head. So you have to have rebellion in order to control a king.
And it
So
keeps
we
going back to
remedied
that over and over again, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. They did it over and over again. Each time they stood for liberty against their king, they actually secured greater control over government, secured greater rights for the people, but they always went back to the king, and you just can't control kings.
Why does
So
it fall apart like that? Why does it keep having to go through that cycle?
Well, because a king is not a representative government, and government only exists in its proper limited aspect when there is a constant, peaceful control of government.
Right, but I'm saying if they know that about
constantly doing that.
If they know that about the king, why do they keep going back to a king?
Well, because we're slow learners.
I guess so.
Yeah, we're just. Think about it. Ask the audience, so I don't, ask you directly.
Sure.
How many people are willing to admit that they've made the same stupid mistake more than once in their life?
Yeah, I think what really helped me to start learning is realizing how I had been completely, crazy in so many ways and not known what was really going on. And as soon as I said, there's no ego to it, nothing to defend, it's just show me I'm wrong, that's great because I'm closer to what's right.
Well, and a really good friend of mine, it's like Captain Obvious thing, but the people don't know what they don't know, right?
No,
and if all they've known is kings, then they keep trying to improve the king situation that they're in.
Right.
But see, this is the brilliance of what the American founders did. They actually looked back over that 700 years and they recognized the single repeating factor. Here they are rebelling. Here they are creating greater contracts, securing greater liberty for the people, creating smaller governments, and it always ends up the same way. So what's the common denominator here? Well, it's the king. Well, if we're going to secure liberty for the people, then we can't have kings anymore. And so
it was right there.
They
They offered that position to George Washington too.
Yeah. That's how close we were. So.
Okay, so I think what I've been trying to get at here is the only reason for any of this learning, studying, talking about it is to implement solutions. I can't think of another reason to do it other than just entertainment, which doesn't really change things.
No.
So if we had conscious people now, which you're actually working on with the educational projects, and you'll have to come back, I hope, for another episode to really get into the detail of what this means. But just as a 30-second overview, what would conscious people do right now in the situation we're in?
Well, obviously, education is the first. Is not just simply the beginning; it's the middle and the end.
Okay.
So you must continue to educate, and you must continue to educate generations. You can't just be satisfied, I got the smarts, we're done. You've got to keep educating, right? And then the solution has to begin at the state and local level. You have to work to establish liberty-minded, constitutionally obedient government at the local level where you have the most control.
Okay.
Because if you're totally honest, you have more control over your county commission than you do your U.S. House rep. You have more control over your state legislators than your U.S. senator. You have more control over your sheriff than the U.S. attorney general, and more control over your governor than the president of the United States.
So work
And if
from
the
the
answer
bottom
to any
up.
of those questions are no, then here's the problem. You've lost control.
Right. Which is where it is now.
Yeah, so you have to work from the most local level that you need, right?
Okay.
Even if that means beginning with your homeowners association, if you
Yeah,
are
yeah.
cursed with one of those. So
Right.
you start there and you build out this way. Because
Okay.
here's what happens. When you start local, then you inevitably train others and show others through experience the benefit of liberty-minded, constitutionally obedient government.
Right.
So then you bring more into your educational folds. They see the benefits of it. And so then it grows. You start county, you start city, then county, then district, then state. And then once you have a constitutionally minded or a liberty-minded, constitutionally obedient state government,
Right.
then in reality, you don't really even care what the federal government's doing, because your governor, your sheriff, your legislators, you're not going to let them exercise unconstitutional authority in your state.
Right.
But then you have an example to the rest of the country what a constitutional state's supposed to be, and you can start controlling the federal government.
And it
again.
can spread, right? Yeah, and one of the things we'll talk about next time is, people say over and over again, this is not a democracy. You hear so many people say, we have to save our democracy, and it's a constitutional republic. But the government, which is the subject of the constitutional republic, is below the states, which is below the counties, which is below the people. And that's sounding more and more like an enlightened form of democracy ultimately.
Yeah, well, we have to understand that, as the Declaration of Independence does, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed.
Right.
Government is the creation of people. People are not the creation of government, which
Right.
means people are always superior in power to government, and our rights don't come from government. They come by the nature of our creation.
So,
We teach all of this at libertyfirstsociety.com. We have an activism boot camp. We have dozens of classes that teach all of this from an educational but also a solution-oriented perspective.
exactly. So the websites that people need to know about, libertyfirstsociety.com, KrisAnneHall.com. And if they study those sites, everything is there, right?
Right, exactly. They can even access our movie, Noncompliant.
Yes, that's a great movie. We should mention that. Noncompliant.com, is that where that is?
Yes. And there's no cost. It's a nonprofit movie, so if anybody, we're actually working on Noncompliant 2. So if anybody wants, we're coming towards the end of the year. If you need to make a donation, for a tax write-off, if that's something
Right.
you're looking for, or if you're just a charitably minded person and you don't care about the IRS,
Yeah.
we are a nonprofit, and we provide these things to people at no cost because this is our mission. So everything that we do is based off donations of people that believe in what we're doing.
Where do they go to donate?
So if you want to tax benefits, then you donate at noncompliantmovie.com.
Non-compliant movie. Is that where they watch the movie also?
It's where you watch the movie also.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, obviously we just scratched the surface. And when you have time, we'll go into more detail, and I'm looking forward to that. But what you've said is enough to build on.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Hold on, and we'll say goodbye in the break. So there goes KrisAnne Hall, you guys. I hope you got a lot out of what she had to say. And basically, she's saying that we have, some serious issues that need to be fixed, and it would be good to fix them sooner rather than later, so that the cost of fixing them, and not just money, but in experience, would not be so steep. And remember her websites. She's got a great point that education is at the key of it, because there's no system of government or anything else that's going to fix it with unconscious people. And she's working on educational programs right now. And she mentioned her website for that, which I wrote down. It's libertyfirstsociety.com, and her other site, KrisAnneHall.com, and the movie, which I can tell you is a great video, and it's at a good price, which is free. And that's noncompliantmovie.com. Excellent film. And it's basically trying to interest the American public, but everybody else in other countries too, to educate themselves about what's really happening, about what their abilities are, what they can actually do. And her point is work primarily at the local level, where you can encounter the people face to face and work directly with local representatives and people in the city or the county governments, and obviously school boards, which have been a big issue lately, and have an impact there. And then the people who want to and are oriented towards working at the state and federal levels can keep doing that too. So I think it would be really worth going to her libertyfirstsociety.com and doing as much in their educational program as possible. I'm going to do that myself. I really want to learn everything that she's got to say about constitutional law and all the other aspects that she mentioned. So maybe you can do that with me if you want to. And remember, this is our Sunday show. We've got a Saturday show called Lost Arts Radio Live. Current events related. It's really, we cover all kinds of topics on that, and are still on a lot of platforms, and you can see which ones that we're still on have not been censored from by going to lostartsradio.com, the main website, lostartsradio.com. And then after that, Saturday afternoon, U.S. time, Lost Arts Radio live show, there's a meeting of the people that are wanting to go into deeper levels of it and work with their own situations, and that's planetaryhealingclub.com. And that's the access point to that private meeting that's not censored. And Doug and I are there live every week. And we get into some really interesting issues, including, the whole thing started with a focus on the suppressed information on natural healing, which is still available. It's just the government tries to silence it wherever they can, natural ways to deal with all kinds of physical conditions. But then we get into other issues connected to that, which have to do with consciousness and attitude and awareness and development of the abilities that we all have that we forgot about a long time ago, by which we could help take back the natural state that the world should be in, of the kind of liberty that KrisAnne was talking about. I think it's not too late. It's still possible, but it starts not only locally, but in yourself, rather than seeing the faults of everybody else and trying to convince them to change. You change, which has to start by acknowledging and becoming aware of where you could do better yourself. And then that spreads automatically. So there's a lot to talk about with that. That's planetaryhealingclub.com. And stay in touch with us at lostartsradio.com. That'll show what sites we're still on. And you can help us get by the censorship and the shadow banning and all kinds of suppression by sharing the links, which would be greatly appreciated. And going to the donate button also at lostartsradio.com to help us stay on the air if you want to do that. And there's a Subscribe Star link there too, subscribestar.com/lostartsradio. Those things help us keep going because we're not doing commercials right now and haven't up to this point. We're trying to do it without that. So if I recommend a product or somebody to you, it's because I really think it's good. And I've probably had experience with it myself. And, it doesn't mean we don't want to ever take a sponsor, because if one comes up that looks completely clean with no strings or anything, and I can get rid of them the minute I see them doing something not good, we may do something like that in the future. But right now it's just your donations and small dues in Planetary Healing Club that help us keep going. So I think that's about it. Watch the Sunday shows for our main guest shows and the Saturday afternoon shows for the current events, and stay in touch. There's contact forms, questions, comments, suggestions for other shows. you're welcome to communicate with us anytime you want. And the main bottom line message being, take care of yourself. Don't fall for the fake, health direction that things are being taken into the direction of more and more drugs, oral and injected, and all kinds of stuff that's invasive and actually hurts you and leads to more problems. Learn the real stuff that's being hidden. And the same goes with technology and energy and all those things. They all have life-friendly alternatives that work really well and are already proven, and they're just being hidden right now. So we need to bring those out in the open. And there's some changing that needs to be done, and it really comes from you. So I consider you as the great star of this movie that we're in, and you're writing your own script. Write it well for the kind of leader and hero that you want to see in the movie. That's you. It doesn't mean you have to be a big public figure or anything. It's the same at work or doing your jobs or cleaning your house or dealing with your family. The energy that you put into everything that you do affects the whole world on a really deep level. So you're very much appreciated. And as I say, stay in touch. Thanks for being with us for the show with KrisAnne, and we'll see you here next week. Have a good week.